Mike Huckabee has gone full Trump on the issue of Muslims and also the war on Christianity. So many Republicans believing it these days. Here is one of the reasons why. You're going to see in his recent comments about President Obama and Christianity.
Here's the point. There is no religious test to hold public office in America. I'm more concerned about the authenticity of their faith and how that plays out in their policies. I'm also concerned about a guy that believes he's a Christian and pretends to be, and then and says he is, but then does things that makes it very difficult for people to practice their Christian faith. I'm disappointed if a person says, I'm a Christian, but you invite to your home, and then you invite a whole bunch of people who are at odds with the Catholic Church policy. I think there's something very unseemly about that.
And it would seem that even the Vatican themselves are actually very concerned about whom the president has invited to meet the Pope.
Yeah, I have actually not gotten that word at all. That's not in the news, that the Pope was concerned with who got invited to the White House.
Yeah. There were activists, climate activists, LGBT activists, amongst others. Pope didn't seem to care.
Huckabee mentioned the climate activists too. But wait a minute, the climate activists agree with the Pope. The Pope agrees with them. So he's like, it's unseemly to invite people who are against the Christian church. Well, then the Pope is against the Christian church.
No, they mean it's unseemly to bring the Pope in. Because he's against the Christian church.
At least according to Mike Huckabee's interpretation of the Christian church.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's crazy talk. He said he believes he's a Christian and then pretends to be a Christian. He refuses to just come out and say he's not a Christian, he's a Muslim, but that is exactly what he's saying. He is only pretending to be a Christian, and then he's going to go on to, he goes to extremes to accommodate Muslim terrorists, shows nothing but disdain for Christians, and his administration will go down as the most anti-Christian in American history. So why do 70% of Iowa Republicans believe there's a war on Christianity? Because every right-wing Christian leader is telling them that he is a Muslim plant and he is trying to destroy your church.
Okay, he's not sure that the guy's a Christian, and that's why he's concerned about how he invited the Pope. Yeah, that's probably what a Muslim president would do, invite the Pope to the White House. Okay, he didn't think that one through completely.
No,
but he's like, it's some sort of trick, and it's a Muslim, and he's of course pissed at the Pope as well for believing in climate change and being more open to homosexuals and not hating them entirely and not stripping away all their rights, and actually caring about the needy, just like Jesus Christ would. But they're acting like they're mad at who he invited along with the Pope, but they're also mad at the Pope for his beliefs, and hence they're mad that Obama is featuring the Pope in the White House and what they view to be his political beliefs. But they love his political beliefs when they agreed with him, like pro-life. I mean, where'd you get that from, Mike Huckabee, right?
100%, yeah.
That's right. Okay, so, but they're acting like he invited the Grand Ayatollah. No, he invited the Pope, not the Grand Ayatollah.
And if you hate him so much, why are you mad that Obama insulted him? You got to choose one of those two to be pissed about.
Right.
If you have any doubts about the compatibility of a Christian theocratic presidential candidate like Huckabee getting into office, let's find out what Huckabee thinks about democracy and the value of your vote in this video.
What do you prescribe for citizens to do? How should people begin to get involved so that we can fix this crisis of citizenship and bring back this balance between self-governance and government?
Don, I know that most politicians say we want everyone to vote. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want everyone to vote. if they're so
Unless
stupid.
they're voting the right way.
Well, that's right. If they're going to vote for me, then they need to vote. If they're not going to vote for me, they need to stay home. I mean, it's that simple. But in the big picture, there are people who vote and they have no idea what our Constitution says.
Yeah,
like our Constitution that's in favor of democracy and thinks everybody should get to vote.
Yeah.
And I thought when I read it, I thought he was joking. But when you hear him, he doesn't seem like he's joking that much. I mean, other people laughed and stuff.
He may be joking, but he's not really joking.
Yeah. And I love the idea of this guy calling other people stupid. That's hilarious. Now, he went on to talk in that interview about how the federal government wants to, quote, dissolve the republic. Sounds like you want to dissolve the republic because you're not that in favor of democracy. Anyway, he says, by placing the states under remote control. Okay, so it again triggered for me. Why do they care so? And it's funny that I have to remind myself every once in a while of this, right? Why do they care so much about states' rights? So that seems like why is that a conservative issue versus a liberal issue? What, I mean, in terms of because some states want to restrict gay marriage. So, okay, I get it why conservatives would be in favor of that. But some states want to legalize marijuana, and the conservatives hate that.
Yeah.
Some states want to legalize assisted suicide. Conservatives hate that. So why do they care so much about it? And they get everybody riled up, their base too. They're like, states' rights. It seems like such a peculiar, legalistic thing to get worked up about, right? And then every once in a while, then I remember, right, the original states' rights issue.
Yeah.
Slavery, right? So all
Jim
of this,
Crow and desegregation.
Yes. So it's not to say that the people who care about states' rights now want to go back to slavery. That's not what I'm saying. But the reason they cared about states' rights in the first place and what that triggers for them, it triggers for them, yes! Or remember when they took our rights away by taking our slaves? So don't take my rights away. I get to dominate. In my state, I get to dominate over other people. Yeah. I've been doing it for hundreds of years, and these sons of bitches are going to come in here with their highfalutin federal government, right, and take away my rights to hate on blacks, gays, or whoever I'm hating on today. Well, I got states' rights, right? That's what states' rights means. That's what Huckabee's talking about.
Yeah. And I would say, finally, that's to the extent that they ever genuinely cared about states' rights. They do definitely care about it on those particular issues, but as a general orientation towards politics, I don't think that they ever cared any more than liberals do. I think that when they had the chance to pass a federal bill that would affect all states that supported a policy that they approve of, in the case of DOMA or a federal ban on abortion, those sorts of things, they're not going to stop and say, well, is this consistent with our political philosophy? No, I don't think that they ever genuinely cared about it, except when it came to slavery.